Hey, welcome back to the Syndicate, the blogcast edition. I'm your host, author, reader, writer, angel investor, startup advisor, Matt Ward. And what this is it's a series of blog posts where some people like audio, some people like reading. I figured, let's do both. Now, I know you don't like distractions, neither do I. The Syndicate.vc to find out more about us, what we do with the companies we're investing in, and some of the incredible expert roundtables and podcast interviews we're doing with top angels and VCs around the world. But now, let's get on with the episode. So today we're talking Uber. Uber's going to zero, and Benchmark knows it. Why Airbnb's 100 times better business than Uber. Moving first is a tactic, not a goal. It's much better to be a last mover than a first mover. Peter Thiel. He's a smart guy. On the surface, this seems contrarian. When's being last better than being first? But Steve Jobs understood this. Apple didn't make the first MP3 player. It didn't even make the first smartphone. Yet in consumer tech, Apple's synonymous with both. That was no accident. This is Thiel's theory in practice. Wealth accrues not to the first, but to the monopoly. The company that captures the market, makes consumers forget all others, and rides the waves as long as profits come. They're the last. There's no successor coming. That's where the money's made, and that's where startups and businesses should strive to be. Move slow and be boring? No, not at all. That's not what Thiel's talking about. That's horrible advice. Just look at Windows Phone or the Kodak digital camera. It's not about perfectionism either, though. Lean startup principles still apply. You want to move fast and probably will break things. But don't sacrifice the it factor it takes to win. The iPhone killed the BlackBerry because it was 10 times better. It's not about rushing a competitor to market. It's about building the perfect enough product to crush the competition with an innovative moat that gets stronger over time. And stronger and stronger. Like the App Store. Steve Jobs succeeded where RIM failed, BlackBerry, for those of you who don't know, because of the team. They convinced Jobs to have the third-party App Store. Initially, he wanted it to be only Apple apps. Well, you know what? The App Store outperformed Apple devs. They were right. Today, even against Android, Apple's App Store keeps people coming back. And that's how they got that first mover advantage to begin with. The flywheel moat. Apple's first mover advantage, not in the smartphone space, but in the 3D App Store. It succeeded beyond their wildest imaginations. Developers raced to build apps and businesses around the iPhone, and the customer experience got better and better and better. And with more users came more devs and more apps, and a never-ending cycle of value creation. The vast majority of which accrued in Apple's overseas bank accounts. Check Ireland. This is an example of what all startups should shoot for. An increasingly defensible business model. The reason? Competitive pressures and customer acquisition costs. Businesses without defensibility almost always struggle with profit and unit economics. Look at Instacart or Uber. Both on the surface is great business. Dig deeper, you find weaker foundations. Let me explain. Uber's a bit like a house of cards. No, that's not a reference to their management. However you say his name, Travis Kalanick, or the Benchmark lawsuit. It goes much deeper. Ride-sharing is an inherently local business. And with local businesses like this, the local network effects are incredibly strong. Uber spends a bunch, they enter a city, onboard drivers, they pay to acquire customers. And as more drivers and riders start using the system, it becomes more and more efficient, and the unit economics start to make sense. That's the reason Uber, Didi, Grab, and Lyft, and dozens of other ride-sharing startups are raising so much money. It's a land grab with VCs right now. They're racing to control their fiefdoms. There's a big problem, though. Drivers and riders have no loyalty. The reason I use Uber or Lyft, or any one of another dozen services, it's a result of price, availability, and marketing. A better offer from any competitor, I'm gone. The same is probably true of you, and the same is definitely true of drivers. Most Uber and Lyft drivers use 2 phones. They drive for both. Whichever company gets them more business, they're king of the day. Suddenly Uber's moat doesn't look quite so deep. It gets even worse. Buying friends. Every time Uber enters a city, they spend big bucks. But like any other ride-hailing app, I should say, can do the same. So how's Uber win? They enter city sooner, they outspend competitors, they buy riders and drivers. But anyone else can do that too. China challenged Uber. They fought back and they won. They forced Uber to leave with their tail between their legs. Although Uber did get a big chunk of stake in Didi, the Chinese ride-sharing company. I believe it's owned by Tencent. But that's an incredibly valuable resource for the future. But we're seeing this more and more, this challenge. Startups are popping up in cities around the world and countries as well, and they're competing with Uber, and they're doing well. They're raising massive rounds, and locally they're outspending Uber, the almighty Uber. And this is a problem. Uber can't outspend everyone. Like Germany in World War II, eventually Allies overrun an army. That means all Uber has is essentially zero international defensibility. They'll always be on the defensive. By definition, that means Uber can't be the last ride-sharing company. Without a monopoly, they can't create pricing power. This is why they're continuously raising money. And instead, transportation as a service, that becomes a race to the bottom. You're constantly fighting to keep or acquire customers. Otherwise, I'm going to the other one, because they have a better offer, cheaper, faster, better. So Uber's moat, it's a little bit more like a puddle. Airbnb, on the other hand, Airbnb is like Uber on steroids. Whereas Uber, it's a troubled company. I want to say doomed. I don't think it is doomed. They'll exit, they'll make money, but it's nothing like what it should be. They're perpetually sucking up money to stave off the competition. Contrarily, Airbnb is freaking incredible. Airbnb's moat means unless decentralization destroys the internet as we know it, Airbnb will be a massively profitable business. Think about it. How often do you travel? A couple of times a year? Maybe a few dozen if you're busy? What's the one difference between Uber and Airbnb? It's the network effect. Whereas Ubered riders, they're always using the app in their home city. Airbnb is all about exploring. Their network's international and thus nearly untouchable. Let's look at a thought experiment. Let's say B&B Air, a competitor to Airbnb, decides to race around and start pushing into SF, Austin, or New York City. When would you use that service? Only when you're in that city, right? There's a problem. You don't only travel to 1, 2, or 3 cities. You don't want a separate app for every city. Imagine if you had Airbnb for New York, you had Airbnb for LA. You had to download a different app every time. That would be freaking horrible. Imagine how painful that would be. That's a terrible customer experience. That means the only way that B&B Air could actually acquire customers and compete with Airbnb would be Facebook ads targeting travelers to that said city. And they would have to do it right before they traveled, right after they bought the ticket. Otherwise, it's too late. They would need to spend a fortune acquiring customers and onboarding them, and they need to onboard accommodation. Realistically, why would an apartment owner list on B&B Air? Odds are they want customers, and they're on Airbnb as well. That means now they need to list on 2 platforms. And Airbnb is probably driving 99.9% of their customers, because that's where the customers are. Well, eventually the homeowner is going to get bored. They're going to drop off, they're just going to do Airbnb. They don't tell their friends and fellow apartment owners because it was a waste of time. Even if they got a few bookings, it wasn't worth the effort. There's no network effects on the side of owning the apartments. Same thing for the users. Let's say you travel to New York and there's this great app, B&B Air, where you can get an apartment, just like Airbnb. It's nowhere else. Well, unless your friends are traveling to New York, you're not going to tell them about it because it's not applicable. And when it's not applicable, that means it sucks and the network effects don't work. So don't forget Airbnb in this example. They're not going to be standing still. Their international network effects mean every single day they're acquiring new users and new renters. That means every day and with every new user, their network's strengthening. Because their platform's at least 10x better than the competition, arguably, you look at the nature of cities, they're probably at least 100x, 1000x better than the competition. They can't be touched. The competition can never steal users because 10xing Airbnb is impossible, and it's continuously getting harder. Let's look at pricing power. Because Airbnb owns the network internationally, they're a de facto monopoly. Sure, couchsurfing and niche platforms and hotels exist, but Airbnb's core is nearly infinitely defensible. They can raise prices, increase profits, and users have no choice but to stick around. And worst case scenario, B&B Air raises $10 billion, $20 billion, $100 billion to play hardball. Airbnb can still decrease prices, cut margins, and they can keep churning away. There's no problem. Eventually, like Uber, the competitor runs out of cash and goes belly up. Game over. And I know this is controversial, but you want proof? Look at Benchmark. Benchmark Capital is one of the premier VC firms in the world, especially in the US. So why are they suing Sweetheart Uber and Travis Kalanick? Benchmark invested $12 million in Uber. That's now worth approximately $7 billion, at least at Uber's last valuation. That means Benchmark's 20% carry. So how it works in VC, you get 2 things. You get 2% management, so however much of the funds they're managing, plus a 20% carry. So if you turn 100 million into 100 billion, you're getting 20% of that change. That's big, 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 big money. So Benchmark's 20% carry is worth approximately $1.397 billion. That's game-changing money. That's throw away your reputation and make it rain money. At least it seems to be for Benchmark. It's also indicative of something else. Benchmark sees these challenges. Makes no mistake about it. Uber has its fair share of enemies from its meteoric rise. But I'll bet Benchmark is worried about going to zero. They're worried about crashing. Uber's infinite playbook is starting to run dry. As of August 23rd, 2017, Uber's burn rate was about $2 billion per year. Uber's a forest fire that's running out of fuel. Without significant funding, or better yet, pricing power, which they can't have because there's too much competition, Uber's going to burn itself to the ground. Imagine, for all of our American fans, a running back racing towards the sidelines. They're trying to beat the defense, turn the corner. If Uber tunes the corner, it's like 100 million touchdowns. Unfortunately, in a world of increasingly many and increasingly powerful competitors, there are no touchdowns. Benchmark sees the light. Either unload the stock or IPO so they can cash out. They can't let this $1.4 billion payday airliner crash. So what do? They need a liquidity. But let's look at the future. What about AI? What about driverless? Does that save Uber? The short answer, no. Uber's business model is predicated on drivers owning the cars. In a world of autonomous vehicles, where vehicle ownership, where does that lie? Odds are fleets or privately owned. Odds are fleets, so privately or publicly owned. That's the question. What happens for Uber's driverless cars? Well, there's a couple choices. A, Uber can buy them all, or they can lease them. Those are the only two options. Either way, their costs go through the freaking roof. So they're owning them, or they're leasing them from somewhere else. And don't forget about auto insurance. And probably driverless insurance. Oh, and fleet maintenance costs as well. And while autonomous vehicles increase efficiencies and reduce empty times, and are going to cut out all of these driver fees, what happens at night? Uber's demand graph, you guys can't see the picture, I can. But if you go to the article, the Syndicate.vc, you can find it there. But if you look at their demand chart, from essentially 9 p.m. on to midnight, there's almost no... Wait, that can't be right. I think I'm looking at the times wrong. Either way, there's essentially zero demand in the dead of night, which makes sense. So what percentage of the time will cars go unused? It's definitely not 0%. That means massive capital expenditures and waste. Suddenly, Uber's driverless cars aren't quite so sexy or profitable. What happened to the world's largest tax company that doesn't own a single car? Plus, there's another problem. Competition. Google's better when it comes to autonomous vehicles. And there's a crop of startups and corporates lining up to compete. Then there's Tesla. I would never ever count Elon Musk out of a fight. He is a freaking baller. The question is, can Uber overcome this? Is this a scenario where is there a possible scenario where Uber wins? Maybe. Think outside the box. I argued in a recent post about Google's ability to be the operating system of autonomous vehicles. Could a Chrome-like platform be built for driverless cars, capturing customer attention and creating value? The reason for this? Voice disrupts Google. What happens when their search business is gone? They need something else, hence why they've gone hard on autonomous vehicles and a bunch of other projects they've been working on. But anyways, what about Uber? What if Uber owned a company like Netflix or Hulu? They could sell content and entertainment on the rides. Uber needs an upsell. They need a way to increase LTV and margins without added spend. And most importantly, they need a way to keep customers and drivers. Upsells via content or affiliate marketing channels could be that system. Some Uber drivers, they already do this on their own. They have some type of system to earn extra money from advertising. They have those little TV head displays. They're doing a lot of things like this. Uber needs to learn from their freaking drivers and figure out a way to make their business work. And that's the question. Could this extra income could allow Uber to cut the rates or commissions if necessary to keep drivers or riders on the platform and keep out competition? This is a completely thrown out there theory, just making it up as I go, but you know what? It seems to be interesting. It seems like something they could do. Either way, they need an upsell. What are your thoughts? Are there holes in the logic? What are you thinking? Is Uber screwed? Would you rather run Uber, Airbnb? Can Dara, the new CEO of Uber, save it from itself and its business model? These questions aren't considered enough by the tech community. Uber's arguably the greatest hit in the history of VC, at least pre-IPO. And the bigger they are, the harder they fall, and the bigger their appetite. I'm bearish on Uber. I'm incredibly bullish on Airbnb. What about you? If you enjoyed this little blogcast, I guess we can call it, if you thought this content was valuable, interesting, etc., make sure to share it around. Come over to thesyndicate.vc. You can get on our expert roundtable list. So we've had some really incredible guests on talking cryptocurrency. We had another one on AI and the future of autonomous vehicles. We've got one coming up with Tim O'Reilly and James Allworth on consumer tech and the future of what that all looks like. It's incredibly interesting. I try to get the smartest, best, brightest people on. Thesyndicate.vc. If you put a little --subscribe in there, you can get on our email newsletter and get all the great stuff. And if you're an angel investor, I encourage you to join our syndicate. Thesyndicate.vc. I am your reader, writer, host, whatever you want to call me, Matt Ward. And hopefully this has made you think, because that's my goal, to make you think. When you're thinking, you're learning. And when you're learning, you're becoming better. Because if you're not learning, you're dying. Kind of like Uber. Talk to you guys again soon. Cheers.